And yet the true scope of America's industrial reach was still unfolding. Tunisia showed a glimpse of replacement speed and supply depth, but the Mediterranean remained only one theater. Beyond it lay Sicily, Italy, and eventually France, targets that would demand not hundreds, but tens of thousands of tanks, trucks, and guns. In North Africa, soldiers lived among machines. In Europe, the machines themselves would define the battlefield. By the spring of 1943, Tunisia had revealed the lesson in miniature. But it was only a prologue. The true weight of America's industrial might became clear when those same factories that had flooded North Africa turned toward Europe. The question was no longer whether the United States could ship 1,000 tanks into a single theater. It was whether they could sustain entire invasions with a constant river of steel. The answer, written across the beaches of Normandy and the fields of France, was unmistakable. In June 1944, Allied landing reports tallied more than 4,000 landing ships and craft hitting the French coast. Nestled within that armada were nearly 3,500 vehicles delivered on the first day alone, including over 600 tanks. Quartermaster accounts record that by the end of D-Day, 156,000 troops were ashore, supported by 20,000 vehicles. Rommel, now stationed in France, knew instantly what these figures meant. In Africa, he had faced 1,000 tanks with despair. In Normandy, he confronted the industrial embodiment of inevitability. The numbers alone cannot capture the sensory scale. Black and white photographs reveal Higgins boats crashing through waves, their ramps dropping into surf that foamed with gasoline and salt. The clank of tracks echoed across sand as Shermans pushed inland, engines roaring louder than the surf. Grainy film shows men ducking behind hedgerows while tank barrels swung overhead. It was not only the invasion of a country, it was the invasion of arithmetic. Every German strongpoint destroyed by one wave of armor was immediately faced by another. German field logs confirm the paralysis. At Omaha, one battalion reported destroying 27 Allied tanks before noon, yet by dusk another 40 pressed forward. Herr Colonel wrote bitterly, "What is the purpose of victory if every victory vanishes by evening?" This despair mirrored the diaries from Tunisia a year earlier. Industrial war was not about a single clash, it was about the endless replacement cycle that mocked destruction. Every blow landed only invited another. The rhythm extended inland. By July, Operation Cobra unleashed nearly 2,000 heavy bombers and supported a breakout involving over 2,500 tanks and 17,000 vehicles. American supply depots in Normandy consumed 2 million gallons of fuel each day. The figures dwarf those from Tunisia, but the principle was the same. Scarcity was replaced by abundance, uncertainty by confidence. German generals admitted privately that once the beachhead was secure, the war could no longer be won. The factories had followed the soldiers ashore. Civilians witnessed the industrial tide in intimate ways. French farmers described fields littered with gasoline drums and chocolate wrappers. Children chased convoys begging for gum. In one village near Saint-Lô, a priest recorded in his journal, "The road trembles as if heaven itself were marching." To the locals, the liberation arrived not only as uniforms, but as convoys without end. Trucks, tanks, jeeps, each carrying supplies enough to restock a continent, bled dry by occupation. Rommel himself did not live to see the final avalanche. Wounded in July 1944 and later implicated in the July plot, he was forced to choose suicide or trial. Yet his earlier warnings echoed like prophecy. "Numbers are the decisive factor," he had written after Tunisia. In France, that prophecy became Europe's daily reality. Even the most advanced German weapons, the Panther, the Tiger, the dreaded 88, could not halt what they faced. Not a single enemy, but a system, a nation transformed into an arsenal. The human cost was not hidden. For every mile gained, lives were lost. American cemeteries from Tunisia to Normandy hold thousands who rode those tanks into battle. Abundance eased strategy, but never lessened sacrifice. Letters home speak of grief even amid triumph. One soldier wrote after the breakout from Saint-Lô, "We have all the fuel in the world, yet I would give it for one friend back." Industry could deliver machines, but it could not shield hearts. Still, the outcome was sealed. By 1945, U.S. production had delivered over 49,000 Sherman tanks, more than 2.4 million trucks, and 12 million rifles. German output, though fierce, never approached such scale. The imbalance was so vast that historians later noted the Allies had more trucks than Germany had rifles. This was the arithmetic of victory. It was not slogans or speeches that rolled into Berlin, but factories translated into firepower. Visual fragments endure: a Sherman parked beside the Rhine with children climbing its hull, jeeps stacked nose to tail along Alpine passes, rows of supply trucks stretching farther than a camera lens could capture. Each image, captured in monochrome grain, reminds us that war is not only fought in trenches or skies. It is fought in assembly lines, in welding arcs, in the hum of conveyor belts. The battlefield is only the final stage. In the aftermath, the lesson became doctrine. American planners studied Tunisia and Normandy not as isolated victories, but as proof that abundance itself could be a weapon. Industrial depth became the shield of democracy. Veterans returning home often spoke of the war in mechanical terms, of engines that never stopped, of spare parts that arrived before they were requested. It was a memory of fighting alongside machines that felt inexhaustible. Epilogue. Erwin Rommel once looked across a Tunisian ridge and saw 1,000 American tanks advancing. In that moment, he knew Africa was lost. What he glimpsed was more than steel. It was the silhouette of an empire of production. The war in Europe would confirm the truth, that factories more than fortresses decide the fate of nations. Victory was forged not by propaganda or myth, but by the relentless rhythm of industry, and by the hands of millions who never set foot on a battlefield, yet shaped its outcome all the same. Not every Sherman rolled flawless from the line. Field logs recount breakdowns, jammed transmissions, and fire risks from thin armor. Yet these flaws mattered less when replacements never ceased. A burned-out Sherman could be stripped for parts, its husk pushed aside, while two fresh machines rumbled forward. American doctrine embraced this redundancy. Manuals emphasized speed of delivery over perfection. In contrast, German doctrine clung to meticulous refinement. The result was telling. A single Tiger might dominate for an afternoon, but by dusk, its crew faced encirclement by an enemy that multiplied hourly. Imagine the tableau. Black trains thundering through Pennsylvania valleys, each flat car burdened with armored hulls under snow. Switch yards alive with whistles, cranes swinging turrets into place, dock workers in New Jersey tightening cables around tank tracks before lowering them into freighter holds. These frozen images, captured on silver nitrate film, stand as monuments to a nation at full stretch. Every rivet tightened under fluorescent light in Cleveland would rattle across the sands of Tunisia weeks later. The scale required discipline in detail. Quartermaster accounts specify that North African forces consumed over 600,000 gallons of fuel daily by March 1943. To sustain this, tanker convoys pumped a steady artery across the Atlantic. German intelligence reports noted astonishment. The enemy transports oil as though it were water. Indeed, water itself became an irony. Allied desalination plants in Bizerte produced 300,000 gallons daily, ensuring crews could focus on fighting rather than thirst. Industrial solutions erased natural limits. Humanity flickered within the clamor. In Detroit, a worker named Anna Kowalski wrote her brother in the 1st Armored Division, "I don't know if my hands welded your tank, but if they did, may it carry you safe." Thousands of such letters crossed oceans, binding factory floor and battlefield. Conversely, German prisoners captured near Gafsa marveled at Sherman spare parts crates stamped with dates just weeks old. One remarked bitterly, "We march with rifles from 1916. They drive machines younger than our children." Every 200 miles of tank advance meant a fresh challenge. Roads collapsed, bridges shattered. Engineers, backed by industry, answered with Bailey bridges shipped in modular kits. Records show one bridge assembled in 7 hours under enemy fire, strong enough to carry a 30-ton Sherman column by dawn. Industry had not only built tanks, but invented the means for them to march where no road existed. The battlefield was reshaped by blueprints drawn in distant offices. By April, U.S. Army reports counted 1,400 Shermans in active Tunisian service. Compare that with fewer than 250 German tanks across the theater. The imbalance was no longer incremental, it was exponential. Rommel's retreat to Italy was not sealed by tactics, but by procurement orders, written months earlier in American offices. His staff understood the lesson grimly. Factories, not foxholes, determined campaigns. The myth of invincible maneuver gave way to arithmetic no desert cunning could erase. Yet the true test of this industrial surge was not only in Tunisia. American generals already looked north to Sicily and beyond, calculating what these factories might unleash upon Europe itself. If thousands of tanks could appear in Africa within months, what oceanic storm would follow across the Mediterranean? The answer, hidden in ledger books and freight schedules, promised something far greater than Tunisia's rolling hills. The tank parks of Tunisia did not merely represent steel. They became villages of men, machines, and the fragile routines of survival. Between battles, Shermans idled in olive groves like restless cattle, their engines ticking with residual heat. Crews brewed coffee on engine decks, the bitter aroma mixing with the metallic tang of lubricants. War diaries from the 1st Armored Division record that by March 1943, 1 in 3 Shermans was sidelined at any moment, not from enemy fire, but from clogged filters, worn tracks, or cracked gearboxes. Life around these machines turned into a cycle of repair as much as combat. German prisoners later described astonishment at the speed of these repairs. An American field workshop could replace an entire tank engine in under 8 hours. Quartermaster logs confirm nearly 132 Shermans were returned to service within 2 weeks of Kasserine. German mechanics, by contrast, salvaged parts from wrecks under bombing raids, sometimes taking 3 days to coax a single panzer back into motion. For the men on the ground, it felt like 2 different wars, one sustained by conveyor belts, the other by scavenging. Photographs show candid scenes, GIs stripped to undershirts, sweat streaking their backs as they hammered road wheels back into place, chaplains pausing beside tank rows to read evening prayers, laundry strung between turrets like improvised clotheslines. The images have the softness of silver gelatin prints, grainy light, edges blurred, yet emotions clear. Soldiers carved names into armor plates, baptizing their Shermans Missouri Mauler or Chicago Queen. These nicknames tethered steel to home, reminders that factories were not abstract numbers, but hometown lifelines. Not all moments were mechanical. In captured letters, German soldiers complained of rations growing thin, with ersatz coffee and horse meat filling the void. American diaries from the same weeks described crates of canned peaches, chocolate, and even Coca-Cola arriving with spare tank tracks. O. Sergeant in the 1st Armored scrawled, "We share cans of fruit like Sunday dinner. The Germans look at us as if we are magicians." The contrast struck deeper than taste. It revealed how ideology that promised dominance collapsed under the weight of scarcity. Even among allies, adjustments were human. British crews who had endured years of rationing marveled at American abundance. One British gunner noted wryly, "Their mess tent smells of bacon each morning." It is difficult to dislike men who smell of bacon. These sensory contrasts, trivial at first glance, carried heavy consequences for morale. A well-fed tanker approached battle with confidence. A hungry infantryman approached it with resignation. Tanks became mobile kitchens as much as weapons, carrying tins and kettles alongside ammunition racks. The battlefield itself became a forge of improvisation. Farmyards were converted into depots, where children watched mechanics patch bullet holes with welded plates. One Tunisian farmer, recalling years later, said, "The Americans gave us chocolate in exchange for hay to line their tank pits." Such exchanges stitched local civilians into the rhythm of industrial war. Where German doctrine sought to extract and requisition, American practice often bartered, sometimes clumsily, sometimes generously, but always backed by supply chains that made gifts possible. Yet cracks appeared in the facade. Not every Sherman crew believed in inevitable victory. Letters censored but preserved in archives reveal doubts. "If they have so many tanks, why do we keep dying in them?" One corporal wrote. Machinery eased fear but did not erase mortality. In March alone, over 300 American tanks were destroyed or disabled in Tunisia. Abundance dulled the sting for commanders, but could not console families. The war of factories still consumed flesh and bone. The German side showed similar fractures. Prisoners taken near Maknassi in March spoke candidly to interrogators. "Our propaganda said Americans were soft, but they never run out of machines. We begin to think we are the soft ones." Ideology cracked not from speeches, but from the sight of endless columns grinding forward. Rommel himself had warned Berlin of this psychological toll, noting that "our men are not broken by defeat. but by the futility of resistance against numbers. Visual records from those weeks provide haunting juxtapositions. A Sherman parked beside a stone farmhouse, laundry hanging on its barrel. Children peeking from windows at GIs who handed them gum. At the edge of the same frame, a German prisoner slumps in shadow, boots worn to rags. These contrasts captured more than victory. They captured a collision of worlds, one fed by production lines, the other starved by blockade and exhaustion. The daily grind wore everyone thin. Mechanics inhaled fumes until lungs rattled. Drivers blistered their hands on overheated levers. Infantrymen envied tank crews' mobility, while tank crews envied infantrymen's relative anonymity. And yet, each dawn, engines turned over again. Reports note that by April 1943, 75% of American armored units in Tunisia could deploy on short notice, a testament not just to factories, but to the weary hands keeping the machines alive. Humanity flickered even in destruction. In one instance near El Geta, an American unit paused its advance when they found a wounded German crewman beside his burned Panzer. A GI offered water from his canteen, whispering, "You fought hard." Moments like these broke through the iron rhetoric of both sides, revealing men trapped in machinery larger than themselves. The war of ideology shrank in the presence of shared thirst. By late April, the farms and valleys of Tunisia had become vast workshops, every hedgerow sheltering spare parts, every courtyard hiding fuel drums. Civilians spoke of hearing engines at night, as if the earth itself pulsed. The thunder of armor was no longer sporadic. It was constant, a background to daily life. For Rommel's successors, the psychological weight was heavier than the physical threat. Tanks could be fought, factories could not. A brittle sheet of onion skin paper, stamped Geheime Kommandosache, was discovered in a Tunisian farmhouse after the fighting. Its ink had run from desert sweat, but the words were clear enough. Enemy armor concentration exceeds all estimates. Dated late February 1943, it bore the signature of a German liaison officer who had ridden with Rommel's staff. What had he seen on the road west of Spatler that day? Why had his hand trembled enough to leave ink blots between the lines? The answer lay in a vision of steel. Columns of American tanks, each carrying the white star freshly painted across their turrets, stretched until the horizon shimmered. Quartermaster tallies later revealed over 850 serviceable Shermans had rolled into Tunisia by mid-February, with another 200 light tanks in convoy. For Rommel, who had relied on fewer than 100 operational panzers during his last push, the imbalance was staggering. Yet at the time, in the choking haze of North Africa, it unfolded like a mirage that hardened into reality. Dust coated every eyelash. Local farmers hid behind olive groves as engines thundered. Allied reports counted tank treads chewing through 8 miles of road in a single afternoon. The smell of hot oil and churned earth hung heavy. German forward observers, hidden in wadis, scribbled frantic notes. "This cannot be replacement trickle, it is avalanche." Within days, intercepted radio traffic confirmed American depots were disgorging entire armored divisions, not piecemeal battalions. The shadow of Detroit was now visible in Tunisia's barren hills. Rommel's diary, preserved in fragments, contains a chilling line dated 22nd February. "If true, we stand before a new kind of war. Not maneuvers of men, but of machines without end." He had faced numerical inferiority before, against British Matildas in 1941, against Grant tanks in 1942. Yet then he had trusted mobility, surprise and the desert's vastness to even the odds. This time mobility would not suffice. The sheer mass bore down too quickly, like a tide ignoring rocks. At Kasserine Pass just days earlier, German units had routed green American regiments. German dispatches celebrated over 180 enemy tanks destroyed or abandoned. The victory banners were hung too soon. For every Sherman burned in the pass, another rolled ashore at Oran or Bizerte. U.S. shipping manifest listed 140,000 tons of cargo arriving in North Africa in February alone. The rhythm of replenishment outpaced destruction. A battlefield snapshot from a Luftwaffe pilot shows smoking hulks littering a valley, yet behind them, dust clouds of fresh arrivals. Picture the contrast. Rommel's mechanics scrounging spark plugs from wrecked Italian M13s, while across the lines American crews unloaded crated spare parts by the ton. Not courage against cowardice, but scarcity against abundance. Even German officers admitted in captured letters that the material battle could not be sustained. One sergeant wrote to his wife near Stuttgart, "We fire until our barrels glow, but they return tomorrow in greater numbers. We hear their factories more than their guns." Still, the Wehrmacht fought on. In late February, 10th Panzer Division launched counterattacks near Thala, with just 27 tanks operational. The ground shook under the roar, and for hours the Germans pressed American artillery to its limit. But by nightfall, columns of Shermans countercharged. Allied logs noted 5-1 advantage in armored hulls. The German spearhead broke not for lack of valor, but from absence of reserves. The sky above the battlefield filled with the smell of cordite and the relentless sputter of engines refusing to quit. Camera-ready images from that week show ragged German infantry trudging beside donkey carts while, in the background, rows of American half-tracks gleam under the North African sun. The grain of the photos carries tension, blurred motion from dust storms, faces half erased by glare. They tell a story not of clashing equals, but of exhaustion giving way to industrial power. In each frame, the imbalance whispers louder, and yet Rommel himself did not collapse into despair. He still searched for tactical reprieve. On 5th of March, he proposed a strike near Medellin, hoping to cut British 8th Army before American armor consolidated. German intelligence estimated the British held 200 tanks there. In reality, by dawn they faced nearly 500 British and American machines, supported by over 400 artillery pieces. Quartermaster figures recorded 5,600 tons of shells fired that day alone. The attack bled out in hours. Rommel returned to his headquarters pale and silent. He confided to a staff major, "They replace in weeks what costs us months. Every knocked-out Sherman seems reborn tomorrow." That was not hyperbole. Records show 132 U.S. tanks repaired and back in service within 2 weeks of Kasserine. German repair yards under constant air attack managed a fraction of that. The tide of numbers became self-healing, not just more tanks but faster resurrection. A machine war fed by assembly lines across the ocean. At this stage, Allied officers walking battlefield perimeters reported strange moments of quiet humanity. In one burned-out German half-track, an unopened tin of cocoa was found, its label in Gothic script. A U.S. chaplain noted, "Even the enemy carried sweetness for the evening." Elsewhere, captured German prisoners spoke of children they feared would never see sugar again. These brief glimpses revealed men trapped beneath ideologies, powerless against supply chains stretching from Chicago and Pittsburgh to Tunisian sands. The question that lingered in every headquarters tent was simple. If so much armor could arrive within weeks, what would months bring? By April 1943, over 1,400 operational U.S. tanks were in North Africa. The number loomed over every decision, every counterattack, every retreat. Rommel, exhausted and ill, finally left Africa in March. His departure letter warned Berlin, "We are facing a mass of steel that will roll wherever it pleases." The prophecy unfolded with brutal certainty. As the dust settled on Tunisia's ridges, one truth became undeniable. Africa was not lost through maneuver alone, but through the echo of factories thousands of miles away. Yet the full magnitude of that industrial storm, how America forged an armored fist from raw ore and conveyor belts, was only beginning to be revealed. The desert silence was broken not by gunfire, but by the mechanical heartbeat of an assembly line thousands of miles away. In 1943, when Rommel's weary observers counted the silhouettes of Sherman tanks cresting Tunisian ridges, they were not only staring at battlefield replacements, they were staring at the distilled force of a continent-sized factory floor. Detroit's stamping presses, Pittsburgh's steel furnaces, Chicago's machining shops, all echoed through the clatter of tank treads on African soil. How could such a tide be conjured so quickly, and why did it seem endless? American industry had practiced miracles before. Quartermaster tallies confirm that by January 1943, U.S. plants were producing nearly 2,000 tanks per month. One plant in Grand Blanc, Michigan, the arsenal of democracy's largest, turned out 25 completed Shermans every day. At its peak, more than 12,000 workers swarmed that factory, welding, riveting, painting, and testing. To a German staff officer, calculating reinforcements in single digits. Such figures defied imagination. Numbers alone were not the marvel. It was the rhythm, the cadence of machines that never stopped. In grainy black and white photographs, women in overalls bend over weld seams while sparks fly like desert fireflies. The steel plates they fused would be shipped by rail, then by convoy, until they became hulls grinding across Tunisia. Each image carried a sensory punch, the hiss of acetylene torches, the sting of iron dust, the musk of sweat-soaked uniforms on 12-hour shifts. These were not faceless production lines. They were battlegrounds of endurance, where civilians fought fatigue to build weapons faster than they could be destroyed. The logistical ballet was staggering. Quartermaster records from North African depots note that a single Sherman required 40 tons of cargo space, including spare parts, ammunition, and fuel reserves. Convoys moving from Norfolk to Casablanca averaged 70 vessels, each loaded with everything from tank engines to rations. German U-boat captains celebrated sinkings, yet shipping manifests reveal the replacement rate exceeded the loss rate by nearly 4 to 1. For every freighter claimed by the Atlantic, 3 more arrived. It was less a race than a conveyor belt that could not be broken. The Germans had no true equivalent. Factories at Kassel and Magdeburg produced formidable Panzer IVs, but at barely 150 per month in early 1943. The much-vaunted Tigers trickled from Henschel at a rate of fewer than 20 monthly. These were masterpieces of engineering, but as Rommel later remarked, quantity becomes quality. In North Africa's vastness, a battalion of Shermans, even if imperfect, overwhelmed a company of Panzers. Numbers forced decisions. A commander could afford to risk a Sherman. He could not risk a Tiger. The industrial math dictated tactics before a shot was fired. One depot officer in Tunisia described the site in a February letter. "We received 110 tanks in 1 week. Crews christened them with chalk names before the paint was dry." You could hear the laughter of mechanics racing to tune engines, as if each delivery meant another chance at survival. This was more than machinery. It was morale packaged in steel. Each arrival shouted to tired infantry that reinforcements were inexhaustible. For German soldiers watching through binoculars, the opposite impression formed, that defeat was inevitable.